My name is Patrick McCormick, and you are listening to the ZEN Disc Golf Podcast. And just like that, we're out of hibernation. Hello and welcome back to the ZEN Disc Golf Podcast, the new ZEN Disc Golf Podcast. It's been a while, folks, but I'm so happy to be back, and I'm so happy to have so much in store for you. So this is episode number 1 of the ZEN Disc Golf Podcast, the new ZEN Disc Golf Podcast. I guess it's been, 4 years since episode 30 of the original podcast came out back in 2016. And it is 2021 now, and so much has happened in that time.
Way too much.
Yeah, and if you want to take it all the way back, it really starts at 2014, and maybe even a little bit earlier when the whole concept of ZEN Disc Golf began, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, the history, the story of ZEN Disc Golf. And I have brought with me my lovely bride sitting across from me, one who's been with me through it all, and witnessed and been a part of this whole thing, my life, obviously, and
the disc golf journey,
and this story, which she's very much a part of. And I couldn't do this without her to try to tell this story from beginning to end, because there's some definite ups and downs in this story. And I think the people need to know, especially because I disappeared for a long period of time. And I had to. I really didn't have too much choice. But the warm welcome that I've gotten from coming back when I decided to write another book and then decided to bring the podcast back, just the excitement from everybody. And then, I opened it up to say, hey, I'm going to do this podcast again. Who'd like to be a guest? And today is January, 4th?
Yes, January 4th.
I'm booked till March on the ZEN Disc Golf Podcast. And I don't mean just like, players from my local league, even though they have said they'll be on the podcast too and probably bring them on. But I've got pros, I've got manufacturers, I've got inventors, I've got people who are big in the sport right now. And oh my gosh, just so excited to be bringing this back and getting to talk to so many people. And that's what the podcast is going to be about. It's going to be new. It's not going to be like the old one where I had 3 co-hosts. And that was amazing. And we had a great time. Mm-hmm. Zach, Tim, Chris, and I. We had such a good time, but it was really hard to get everything together, when you're working with 3 other co-hosts.
Pre-Zoom, too.
Yeah. And that's another thing. If you're just listening in and you've subscribed, or you're listening in on the Apple Podcasts or Spotify, ZEN Disc Golf Podcast is now a video podcast, which is completely new for me. And while I was talking to some people when we were beginning to set this up, they said, well, are you going to be just an audio podcast, or are you going to be a video podcast? And I said, oh, crap. Technology has changed a lot, and people kind of expect to be able to see your face.
Yeah, you can't hide anymore.
Yeah, which is sort of unnerving. And we'll tell some stories about how, even though nobody could see my face in the past, how I was recognized on the course frequently. Mm-hmm. And and what an experience that is. And but I want to sort of start at the beginning. And Chris is here to carry a conversation on with me. I'm going to let her talk.
I mean, he could talk to himself for hours and hours and hours. I'd play along.
But she's going to help me remember things and help jog my memory. And she's got some notes here that are going to help us with timelines so we can tell this story. And a unique thing about this story is that I'm also going to, on the video podcast on YouTube, which is where we want to try to send everybody to. We love if you're subscribing on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Stitcher and all those. That's great. We want you to do that because we want to be I want to be a part of your morning drive to work. But even more importantly, we need you to subscribe on YouTube, because that's where the magic is happening these days. And for example, on this podcast, there's going to be a lot of photos and videos over top of us talking about this history over the past several years.
It's just a great way to be more interactive when it comes to YouTube. You get a different experience.
Yeah. So you can listen in on just the podcast on your stereo in your car, but certainly welcome you to jump on the YouTube to get a visual experience as well. And I promise I'll keep my clothes on. Well, I guess I shouldn't promise. You never know what's going to happen. So I guess we should start at the beginning. I started playing disc golf I think I figured it out to be about 23 years ago. And give or take, because I don't have an exact time where I started.
You were a teenager, weren't you?
I was a young teen, and I don't remember how young I was, so I usually just say I was about 15. But after thinking about it, I could have been 13. It really doesn't matter, because I started playing with a church youth group. The youth minister, Jay Russ, who I wrote about in my first book, was a decent, pretty big time disc golfer. Well, he was to me. I mean, he could huck a disc like you wouldn't believe. But he was the guy who took us all out to the disc golf course in Virginia Beach. And he would take us during the summertime just about maybe every 2 weeks. And sometimes it was just me, and other times it was 20 other youths. And, we'd come with what we had. Some people would have disc golf discs. Some people would just have Frisbees that they got at their local family reunion or at the PetSmart. And some people would come with aerobies, which definitely got stuck in the trees very quickly, maybe on the first or second hole. But a lot of times it was just Jay and I, and we would go, and I got really interested in this. And, but there was only that one course. It was a Bayville disc golf course in Virginia Beach. And that was the only place to go play actual real disc golf with baskets, with tee pads, with things like that. But I sort of brought this back to my neighborhood, and we would create target courses with the neighborhood kids. And I was introducing people that early to the sport, because that's what we did.
You were a fan from the beginning.
Yeah, we were. Well, what we did was we played roller hockey and disc golf, and that's what we did. I mean, other than riding bikes and skateboards around, but the majority of what we did was we played roller hockey, street hockey, and we invented disc golf courses, and that's what we did in my neighborhood. So yeah, I must have been about 13, 14, 15 years old. So we'll just say about 23 years ago. When I got to about high school.
I don't remember how old we were. I was doing that.
When I got to high school, I got very into music and music production and being in bands and things like that. And that sort of took over my athletic side. My athletic side was very short-lived as a kid, because I talked about it in Zen and the Art of Disc Golf. I became a music geek, not a band geek, but I was a punk and very into punk rock and industrial and just crazy, any crazy music that was, and we would listen to it, and I would say, I can create this, and I would go home and create it. So I got very involved in that. I went off to college. I was reintroduced to disc golf after Chris and I got married.
No, before, right?
No, I started playing when I moved in with you at Chicks Beach, and we realized that we only lived maybe 1.5 miles, 2 miles from Bayville, and I just kind of realized that by accident.
Yeah, I think it was before we got married, though, because we were joking about it.
We
on
were
our
dating,
wedding day.
though.
Yeah, we were dating.
Yes,
living together.
Yes, and so it was like on a bike ride or something like that. I was like, holy cow, I remember this place.
Yeah. I remember you coming back and being like real excited.
Yeah, I was like, I can't believe we live close to this place that I spent a lot of my youth at. And I came back and I said, hey, how about we go play one day? Let's go get some Frisbees. Because I wasn't so sure if it was something that you were going to be totally interested in, or if it was, something that we wanted to invest money in. I certainly was interested in it. But we started off, we just got some Frisbees and we went out there and we threw a couple.
Yeah, I feel like you went maybe by yourself before you took me out the first time and had my adventure with attempting to play.
Yeah, and eventually, at some point, I don't remember the exact timeline of this, but I had purchased 2 starter sets, 2 of the Innova starter sets. It contained an AVR, a Shark, and a Valkyrie, something like that, for both of us. And then I took you out and introduced you to the sport. And you haven't, and that was what, 11 years ago?
Yes.
And you heard nothing but disc golf for the past 11 years. It was
Zen in the art of listening to your husband talk about disc golf.
So what was the experience like when I first took you out to play?
I didn't fully understand it. I don't know.
You weren't aware of disc golf at all, correct?
No, I'd never heard about disc golf before. I had some buddies that were kind of into it, but I never went to see it to really know what it was. And I'm not a golfer, so I just couldn't visualize how it worked and what the rules were.
Yeah, and in between the time that I started playing disc golf, I did play ball golf in high school, so I did play a little bit of that in between. So I grew up around golf. My dad was a big ball golfer. So I've always had this concept of golf, so I guess I assumed that you understood everything that there was to know about pars and birdies and and things like that.
He's a better teacher nowadays, though.
But we went out there, and basically I heard those chains, and just like I write about in the books, once you hear those chains, you're hooked. And that was it. And I've been playing, and I started playing just about every day after that.
Oh, yeah.
When we first got together, I was sort of ending what I was doing musically at the time. And that took a lot of time for me.
Yeah. I mean, you don't do anything half-ass. When you're into something, you really get into something. So that's how you were with music, and so that nothing else would be available for your time. And then I think you just felt like you did what you could do with it at the moment, and then disc golf was there at the right time to move on to a new passion. And when you're passionate about something, you are fully involved with it. I mean, you are obsessed.
So in addition to music and disc golf, I've also always been obsessed with reading and self-improvement and things like that. And some of my favorite books at the time were Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale, and Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Pirsig. And so I remember playing out at Bayville and thinking, wouldn't it be cool if someone wrote a book called Zen and the Art of Disc Golf?
Yep. I feel like I remember like right when you were saying that.
And so I started coming back, and I think I remember once the idea hit me and I said, okay, I'm the guy who's going to do this. I don't think I finished my round out there. I think I threw my discs back in my bag, jumped on the bike because I would ride the bike over there, and rode back as fast as I could and started putting down ideas.
Yeah. It wasn't your first attempt at writing either. It's not like hey, I'm going to write a book. I've never written anything in my life. You've always been interested in writing, but nothing like that.
Well, musically, I was always writing lyrics, so that meant that I was doing poetry. But I had also written, I had an unpublished novel that I wrote in college, and a lot of just other stuff. I was always big into journaling. And so a lot of Zen and the Art of Disc Golf, which was the first book, started as journals. And then I tried to take those journals and tried to make them mean something for everybody. And that was sort of the goal of Zen and the Art of Disc Golf, to take everybody with me out to play a round of disc golf and show them what I was learning about myself, for better or worse.
And I think it's I remember a lot talking about, because like you said, we were really into the power of positive thinking. And I remember when you were writing that, it was like, yes, this is a book about disc golf. I am writing a book about disc golf. But even if you've never played or ever even really know what it is, you could apply principles in your life. Yeah,
and oddly enough, nobody'd ever talked about golf philosophy with me. And I never, until after this was out, did I know that there were other general, like ball golf books that were philosophical in nature. I didn't even know. But just being out on the course, being in the woods and throwing, I knew that what I was doing was a metaphor for everything else that was going on in life. You throw a bad shot, what do?
How do you handle it?
You go find it, keep yourself together, you find it, you scramble, you try to get up and down, and that's life. Sometimes life hands you some hard things, and we have definitely learned that.
We are a country song.
Over the past year or the past several years.
5 years, yeah.
And that's one of the reasons we're having this conversation right now, to give everybody kind of some insight as to what happened to Zen Disc Golf, what happened to Patrick McCormick, what happened to the podcast back in 2016, and why it's coming back now.
I think you're still talking about too, like before we get into that, just when you did the book, I remember us talking about, like, do you think it's going to sell? The conversations, like, you're like, well, I don't know. I don't know.
You know, and the funny thing is that was never really that important to me. I had recorded a lot of records over time, and I did it for the love of doing it. And most of my band ventures, which this is actually true for most bands who don't get a record contract, and even for some who do get record contracts, bands are like boats. They're money pits. And I lost money, you know, just trying to give away so much music. And where I did gain some minor notoriety within the industrial and punk rock scene, within the local scene, and spread out across the East Coast, I lost a lot of money just, you know, touring and stuff. So you would get in your whatever vehicle you were taking all your equipment, van or whatever you were in, and you would drive 5 hours with a group of 4 guys, and you would go play a show, and they would give you $40 for the night. It doesn't even cover gas, much less, you know, staying overnight someplace. And you have to split that 4 ways, and then equipment. And then, of course, I always recorded at home. So, and here's another detail about the way that Zen Disc Golf is run. Zen Disc Golf has always been run like a independent record label. So I was big on, when I was growing up, like Discord records and Wax Trax records, people who are out there doing DIY and doing it themselves. And so when that's how I had several record labels. Dimension One Recordings and Multimedia was one, Assimilation Records was another, Wex Records was another one. And these were record labels that I had, you know, from the time that I was in high school, just releasing cassette tapes. But it was always a DIY kind of thing. And there near the end, I had discovered sort of a new kind of manufacturing process that helps people get media out there, and that is on-demand publishing. And so I knew that if I could do on-demand publishing of CDs, and what that meant was, back in the day when people actually bought CDs, somebody would order a CD on Amazon, and the press would do one off of a CD and mail it to them. So I never had to keep a big inventory. So I said, if I can do that, I bet I can write a book and do on-demand publishing, and I could.
And that was before, like, it was really a thing, because now you can Google it and find it a little easier, but that wasn't really as popular then. It was new.
Yeah. If you were self-publishing back then, the assumption was you were going to drop several grand on buying hundreds and hundreds of books, and you wouldn't know if it would sell. So the process that I used when I was creating this book was, I knew that I was going to put a book together. Also, Kindle had been out for just a couple years, and my only goal was really just to make a Kindle book. But you were the one that talked me into saying, hey, if you're going to do that, why don't do a paperback?
Yeah, just because I thought it'd be nice to have one too. But yeah.
And who would have known, 9 out of 10 of my sales, maybe even more, have been paperback, even though we're in the digital age.
Yeah. I think people just like to have something like to hold and look at. I don't know. I'm that way. I'm kind of old school like that.
Especially disc golfers. Disc golfers love to collect. I mean, disc golfing is a collector's sport. You know, you don't, when you play baseball or whatever, you know, you don't go out and buy all the baseballs you can find with all the different logos and, you know, and carry them all with you everywhere you go in your trunk, and then,
oh, cool, look.
yeah, look at this. But, you know, with disc golf, it's a collect them all kind of sport. And so I also kind of approached it like, it was like a record label, but also kind of like a comic book kind of a feel, because I had been watching a lot of the comic book men.
Yeah.
And just watching how people just love these tangible items that they could hold in their hands, and how to make these collectible, what can you do that kind of sets it apart. And so there was that, and there was the minis and the bracelets and all of the merchandising that went with it. And so a lot of people have said that Zen and the Art of Disc Golf, when it came out in 2014, 2015, 2016, they've called it a revolution, a lifestyle, and
legendary.
It was sort of like creating a brand, but I didn't know I was going to do anything else other than release it. So when I dropped the Kindle book and the paperback, I did pre-sales. And that was the night you said, so how many do you, I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
How many of these do you think you're going to sell? And I said, I don't know. Back in the day, I would give out 1,000 records and sell 10 because I would give them away, so much. I said, I'd be happy if I sold 5 or 10.
Yep.
Well, this year I learned that I've sold over 10,000 copies of this first book.
Which is crazy.
I had no idea.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I was just telling Scott Stokely the other day, we were talking on his podcast, and I said, the only way that I knew that, because people have been asking me that for 5 years, how many books do you think you've sold? And there's never been a really good way, unless I would have started counting them at the beginning,
right,
to figure out exactly how many books I'd sold. But when I started thinking about writing another one, I wanted to see, I wanted some numbers. I just wanted to look at where I'd come. And I knew the book was still selling and selling pretty well. And so I looked it up, and then I started doing the math. And yeah, between Kindle sales and paperbacks are about
wholesale orders,
92% of what I sell.
Yeah. The
wholesale orders that go to pro shops, and they've gone all over the world.
Yeah, which is crazy.
I sold them to Britain, to Germany. One of the cool early Instagrams was somebody sending me a picture of my book in a library in Sweden, so that was wow. I think I might sell 5 or 10. But yeah, signed copies. There was the team box set that went out with the Kickstarter.
Yeah, the Kickstarter.
Back in the day. So, and then just ones that I've given away, but the ones I've given away aren't even included because
there's no way to track them. You did a lot of contests and things like that to help support the fans, and you've always been pretty generous about giving things away. And
that's kind of what started growing this whole movement or whatever was before the book came out. I think it became sorry to interrupt you, but I think it became a movement just because it was different. And then also it's like, when you look at this, it just looks good. You've always been, we talk a lot about all of your gifts and talents and all of that. It just, all of it has a good feel, good vibe to it. And it's something different. You weren't trying to sell a product. You didn't start with the idea, hey, I want to sell a product and make a bunch of cash. Well, for me, this was an album.
Right.
This was a musical album, and this was an album cover. And I was used to doing album covers for well over a decade.
Right, absolutely.
And so I've always done all of my pieces on all of the books. So I wrote it, and then I did the design. I've always done design, graphic design. And so, yeah. But before the book came out, I began trying to drum up interest with social media.
You're testing it, to see what was out there.
Mainly Instagram and Facebook. And I started doing giveaways. And early on, I aligned myself with Alan Barker, who was just starting or picking up business with Infinite Discs back in 2015-ish, I guess. I think he'd already had the company started, but it was very small and he was growing it. And I reached out to him, and he helped me with a lot of the giveaways, and we kind of mutually helped one another grow. And then I walk away for the couple years that I walked away that I'm coming back from. And, I'm watching Jomez Pro and all that. And I'm seeing Infinite Discs, and they're sponsoring players, and they got Dave Feldberg and they're sponsoring him. And I'm like, holy cow, Alan. I walked away for too long. I didn't know all of this. So if Alan can do it, I can come back and maybe just jump back in the deep end and see what happens. But yeah, definitely, the giveaways and building up a presence on social media was how this wave got started.
Absolutely.
At a certain point, I was invited to do a book signing.
Yep. Play It Again.
Play It Again Sports in Virginia Beach. And Play It Again Sports is pretty much our disc golf pro shop in this area. There's a couple Play It Again. Some of them have more disc golf stuff than others, but apparently the guy who runs them all is a big disc golfer. I don't know him. But I was invited to go down, and I did the signing at the one in Virginia Beach. And the energy was great. And and I met Zach Englehart.
Yep.
And he came in.
So Zach and so Patrick. I'm sorry.
He came in because he saw the poster that said I would be there selling copies, signed copies of Zen and the Art of Disc Golf. And that's where he went for his pro shop to buy disc golf stuff. So he shows up, and there's a funny story about it early on in the first series of podcasts. But he actually kind of hung out around the table looking at discs, trying to ignore us and kind of acting funny and weird. But at a certain point, he kind of turned around and he goes, "So, Patrick," we're on a first name basis just at meeting.
So, Patrick.
He goes, "I want you to sell me your book." And that was the first time anybody had ever
I remember.
That was like his hello.
Yeah. He wasn't like, "Hey, cool book, what's it about?" "Oh, disc golf. I like disc golf." No, he's like, "Sell me this.
I want you to sell me this book."
Yeah. And I remember being like, "Well, that's kind of abrupt."
It was abrupt. But, being a firefighter, I'm kind of used to that kind of alpha personality. So I turned to him and I said, "I don't care if you buy the book or not."
And for me, I was like, I can't believe you sent it back.
And somehow, with that first transaction of words, we became best friends very quickly.
Thick as thieves, for sure.
And I mean, within just a couple weeks.
Y'all's weirdness gelled.
Oh, yeah. We balanced each other out. He was so outgoing and so funny, and I'm so soft-spoken and
yeah, what y'all don't know is Patrick
back.
is actually really introverted.
Well, they should know that.
Well, super introverted.
I'm the one who was kind of a hermit for the past couple of years. But coming out of my shell again. But he and I exchanged phone numbers, and we played a lot of the same courses because we were in the same area: Munden, Bayville. Can't remember
some in Chesapeake or something too.
A brand new one had just opened up there. But we started playing together, and we were playing 2 or 3 times a week. It was probably, and just talking. And I said, eventually I turned to Zach and I said, "Zach, I'm thinking about starting a podcast." And I said, "I would like you to be my host or my co-host." Mm-hmm. And I remember, and I hope Zach forgives me for saying this, but he was like, "Yeah, man, absolutely." And so we kept talking, and then I kind of got the idea. He wasn't exactly sure what I was asking him to do. I said, "Are you familiar with podcasts?" And he was kind of like, "Not really. I don't know what that is." So, but he and I became really good friends, and so I brought him over to the house in Virginia Beach, and we started recording. We probably recorded the first 5 podcasts in 2 days, very quickly.
Sounds like you. Yeah.
Alan Barker was the first one that we got on episode 1 because I had already formed a relationship with him from the CEO of Infinite Discs. And the Chain Cutters Union and Good Up Disc Golf, they were some of my first people we had. And from there, everything just exploded. I mean, the book was already doing well. Mm-hmm. The podcast propelled itself and propelled the book, which propelled the podcast. And I mean, everything got crazy.
I was shocked when you said how many downloads you were having. Like when we talked about recently, I was like, "Are you kidding me? Really?"
By the end of the podcast, we were getting 5,000 to 10,000 downloads per episode.
It's just crazy.
So, yeah. And so hopefully we can do that, regenerate that again. But that was at a time where there weren't many podcasts out there.
Yeah.
And there definitely wasn't any disc golf podcasts. So I think the fact that I dropped a book when there were no disc golf books.
Nothing like that, yeah.
No. And the fact that I dropped a disc golf podcast when there might have been 2 other ones. I'm not sure if Disc Golf Answer Man with Eric McCabe was around back then.
Maybe.
It might have been because I think I did an interview with with them
I
for
think you
that
did.
podcast pretty early. So
Yeah.
they were doing something, and I want to say there was one that was short-lived that was also going on. But the popularity of the Zen Disc Golf podcast and the book just exploded faster than I ever could have dreamed of or imagined, or even could even really appreciate.
Yeah. I don't even think you knew at the time. I mean, obviously you didn't, because we didn't realize until like 2 months ago how big everything had gotten. But I don't think you realized at the time like how big it was. But I do remember us talking a lot about some really cool feedback that you got from the book, from the podcast. Do you remember some of your favorites? Or I remember some really great stories from people who it helped and touched their lives. And
well, one of the early people who wanted to be on the podcast was Alan Hargraves, and I forget how the people got in contact with me, whether it was just through email or Instagram, but Alan he was a mental health professional, and he wanted to use the book for a presentation that he was giving on mental health. And I can't remember exactly what it was, but I thought that was really cool. And then there was a professor somewhere at a college who wanted to use my book as a textbook. Absolutely. Go ahead. There were a lot of things like that. There were a lot of individuals who reached out to me saying that the book had saved their lives.
it's crazy.
A lot of people saying that they suffered with anxiety, depression, and PTSD and things like that. And, I didn't know how I was helping them, but I was thankful that what I had produced was having an effect on people. And I still get those messages today. Your book helped me so much improve my game and my life. And that's better than money.
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah, the podcast started. I guess the next thing that happened, maybe 10, 15 episodes deep, was the Kickstarter, where we did, we released the discs and the minis, I think I signed the judges, assigned discs, and that was insane.
Those sold out and then quick.
It was like, I think the cap that I wanted was $2,000, and it was like $5,000 that came out of it in boxes. Our entire foyer was filled with boxes. We stayed up all night one night just putting these boxes together. But at the same exact time, you were pregnant.
Right.
With Bryce.
2015.
Yeah. So between that and then when you actually had Bryce, I was still doing the podcast.
Right. Yep.
At some point, well, I guess we should rewind. Zach ended up having to move away.
Yeah.
And to me, Zach and I had only hung out probably less than a year.
Yeah, I think it was less than a year, but I have never seen you become friends so quickly with somebody and hang out as much as y'all did. Y'all were really tight for that short amount of time.
Yeah. Zach was in the military, and he was getting out, and he was moving up to where he's from, up in upstate New York. And it kind of came all of a sudden. He was just like, Pat, I'm moving. And it was like, I want to say it was just a couple weeks warning. And, me being, well, okay, well, you got to do what you got to do. But it
crushed you.
It was a little bit devastating.
Yeah.
But it was devastating on a personal level. Zach, if you're listening, this should tell you how much I love you, brother. And my love for you has only grown over the years too. But we started thinking, how are we going to continue this podcast with him away? And one of the things I did was I bought him a microphone so he could, start doing it
long
afar.
Distance, yeah.
But it just became really difficult just with the technology back then. And I think he had some Wi-Fi or some internet issues, which made it very difficult for him.
And just scheduling, trying to schedule people at so many different times and so many different places, and that all was a challenge.
And so I ended up reaching out to Tim Stewart, who we had talked to on one podcast. He was the blogger with Mind Body Disc, and we aligned on so much, and we kind of met by accident digitally. And also Chris Bowden, who ended up forming DG Putthead's blog. Tim Stewart and I connected just on mutual ideas and disc golf philosophy, and we just learned about each other through our writing. And we became friends. And Chris Bowden was a fan of the book and of the podcast, and he was a relentless like tweeter and Instagrammer, and like everything I put out, he'd comment, and he was just so good at making you feel loved.
I remember that now. Yeah.
And so at some point I said, I don't remember how it all came up, but I said, Chris, let's get you on the show. You're such a big fan. You can be a part of this. And so he jumped in. And for a little while, for a couple episodes, it was Zach Englehart, Tim Stewart, and Chris Bowden, all of us together doing this podcast together. It was a nightmare to try to set up, to try to get everybody in the same schedule, because we'd do those 4 people and then also have like a guest.
A guest, yeah.
And we had a certain way of doing things for the podcast. It was very cookie cutter.
Yeah, you had a structure that you went by.
And we had a time frame, we had a time limit. We had certain things we wanted to hit on every podcast, which only left about 20 minutes for a guest. That's different for this podcast now that I'm bringing it back. First of all, it's a one-on-one podcast. There's a structure because there's a beginning and then there's an end. But everything in between is one-on-one with me talking to another individual and trying to figure out what makes them tick and trying to give my listeners as much information as possible to be both entertaining, to give them insight to their, some of their favorite people, pro players, brands, and give them some takeaways that they can take out to the course with them. And that's what's important about these. But as I've told everybody, most of these podcasts will be about an hour. But I'm not stuck on that. If the conversation's good, we're going to keep going. I'm a big Joe Rogan fan. We probably won't go 5-6 hours like I've seen Joe go, but when the conversation ends, that's when we'll end the podcast. So not only will it be that's the new way of doing things, is the not so cookie cutter video podcast, just one-on-one with me and another individual. And, just making sure that everybody's entertained and gets good takeaways. But at the end of the original podcast, I started realizing, and Bryce had just been born, I just wasn't able to keep up with everything that was happening.
Yeah.
And the popularity of the podcast, it actually made it, because we were getting so many downloads, that I was actually getting charged more for bandwidth. And it was hard to even keep up with on that plane.
Well, I think too with the formatting, I remember like us talking about, like, because of the format and the editing, there was so much editing, and then the timelines. And whenever you are doing something, you don't half-ass it. Like we said, you had a certain way you wanted it done, and it became pretty stressful, I feel like, to get done. And then you just realize it's just too much with having Bryce and, with what we had going on, and with scheduling and with editing and all of that. It was a lot of work on top of the fire department and all that jazz.
Right, because we would record a podcast for 45 minutes, and that was 3 hours of editing and show notes.
Yeah.
So my goal is now not to do so much editing. It's going to be on the fly. And so there might be some errors. There might be some curse words thrown on accident around by either me or my guests. I apologize for that.
Bleep.
But, I'm just not going to spend 3 hours editing.
No, I had time for that.
Yeah. I think it's more natural to have long form conversations with people. And I think that's where we are in society right now. People just want to feel like they're a part of a conversation or part of a group. It's, that's how we're socializing. If we didn't live together, we'd be sitting here wearing masks right across from one another, which is absolutely ridiculous. But, it is what it is. But yeah, as we had Bryce, and I was struggling with trying to learn how to be a dad, still be a husband. And I had some stuff going on at work because I was in the process of a promotion and
yeah, you had classes you were taking and challenges you were doing to become lieutenant, I believe, then, weren't you?
Yes.
Like the workup for that.
Yeah, and so all of that culminated, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I didn't feel like it was fair to continue
And not give it your all.
and not, well, yeah, to my listeners, but to you guys, to you and Bryce, to be so split between so many different directions.
Yep. And let's face it, little man, he's never been easy.
No, he hasn't.
Never been easy.
Yeah.
Always been cute. Never been easy.
Yeah, even since the beginning. Came out crying, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I guess most babies do, but even the doctor said, well,
Got the lungs on that
he's-
one.
He's got lungs.
Yeah, for like an hour.
Anyway, and so not long after that, you had gone back to work,
Oh, it's miserable.
and you were not.
It was
having
awful. No, I was not having it. I didn't think it would be that hard, but it was very, very hard. Well, mostly because little man, like we said, was never easy. He would wake up, especially around 4 months, he'd wake up like 7 to 9 times a night, and then trying to work full time on top of that. Ugh, it was a nightmare.
Yeah, and at one point I said to you, I said, I hope I don't kick myself for saying this. I hope I'm not shooting myself in the foot. I think you should quit your job. And I gave you some other, gave you some other ideas of things that you could do because you're.
Well, I was already talking about being like passionate about photography and passionate. I was getting ready to look into maybe doing real estate. Like there was things I was working on. So it's not like I wasn't just getting to hang out with Bryce.
No, but
there was a big leap, and you were a huge part of us doing that leap. It was a big leap of faith to, move our family in a different direction in terms of incomes and time and all that. I mean, I always appreciated that.
Yeah, and so I said, the book's going really good. I think that I think we can be comfortable with you quitting your job and you moving into doing, starting up your photography business and having that take off, and then merging into the real estate. And it wasn't long. It was a couple months before you moved into real estate, and we started realizing what was possible in terms of one of my life dreams, which was owning a large piece of land and now putting my own disc golf course on that piece of land.
Mm-hmm.
And so at some point during this time, I had to tell Chris and Tim that I wouldn't be able to do the podcast anymore. And I had no idea what, telling you to leave the job and then also deciding not to have the podcast running, what it was going to do to my sales. But it was a big leap of faith.
Yeah, I was trying to, I don't remember when, holes in the brain. Because I know it was around May of 2016 that we decided to make this big jump. And then it was around that time that we were like, hey, well, why do we have to do this jump in Virginia Beach?
Yeah, so one of the big things was Virginia Beach, the cost of living is pretty high. Mm-hmm. And we started looking around, and you were the first one to tell me, because I just didn't even know think it was possible. Mm-hmm. To say, hey, we could move more rurally, get a bigger piece of land, and cut our bills.
Yeah.
Well, shut up and take my money.
Yeah.
I've always wanted a big piece of land and wanted to live rurally. I was never a big fan of, big time city living and living in Virginia Beach.
Yeah. We could reach out and touch our neighbor's house.
Yeah.
In Virginia Beach.
I always used to joke that I could put my head through the window and lick my neighbor's house when I lived in Virginia Beach.
At least we had nice neighbors there, but we were still in a tiny little cul-de-sac.
But we ended up we looked at a couple different properties, and we ended up finding a property that was north, about 2.5 hours north, about 2 hours north, I guess.
2 hours, yeah. Hour 45, 2 hours.
And away from everything. And I don't want to talk about the name of this area because this area kind of struggles. So I don't want to give it a bad rep because I really enjoyed my time there, but we did not realize that when we were buying the original 7 acres that we bought, that it was going to be swampland eventually.
Yeah. I mean, we should have had a hint when we had to have flood insurance, but when we went to visit it and look at it, everything was sunny that summer. It was a drier year, and we just didn't realize later on what it would look like.
Yeah, so basically we went out to this property. This was the the last property we looked at. We actually jumped on it pretty quickly. It had a nice big field. It had like a park-like setting behind the house. And it had about maybe 3 or 4 acres of woods at the time.
Yeah.
And I walked... It's funny. It's a funny story because when we got to the house, Chris walks inside to go check out the house, and I didn't even go inside for like the first 45 minutes. Everywhere we went, I had my discs in the car, and I would get out and start throwing and trying to see where hole number 1 was and where hole number 2 was going to be.
That was like the number 1 priority of our purchase.
Yes.
Was, is it right for disc golf?
Yeah, and so we got to this piece of property, and I was like, "This is it." I mean, I got this nice. So we can start here, and I've got some trees. It's kind of open, some Virginia style disc golf here, and then I can really air one out over the field, and then we can go back in the woods. And I went back in the woods, and I'm like, okay, it's going to take some work, but it was all dry. Mm-hmm. It was parts of the woods were older woods, parts of it was newer, super thick woods, but we didn't own that yet.
Right.
But it was nice and dry, and I could envision the course there. And so we popped on it. We put a contract on it.
Yep, that day.
Yeah, and the other good thing that was really nice is it was near a beach, and we liked the small community.
Town. Yeah, we thought it'd be a good place for little man.
Yep. And basically, we were going to be raising him on a farm, with no animals. But I loved it. I thought it was great, and the house was old, 1968.
Yep.
Had the original kitchen appliances in it.
Well, we originally were going to want to get, we talked about getting land and putting a cabin on it. And then we realized before that property it was just too much to do it all from scratch. But what was so cool about that house is the whole inside was like the wood, natural knotty pine, not the fake rehab stuff, but the knotty pine wood walls. So it felt like we were in a cabin there.
A cabin.
Yep.
Living on a disc golf course.
Living on a disc golf course.
And it was Patrick McCormick's dream. And, so we were able to move out of the other house, and we moved into this new house. And then I knew, because I had promised on the last episode of the ZEN Disc Golf Podcast that I did have a new book coming out. It was going to be called Discs and Zen, More Writings on Disc Golf and Life. And this book started as a couple blogs that I'd been posting during the time that I was after this book and up until the time we moved. But then after we moved, I probably wrote the last third of it and dropped that. And that was in
We moved in 2016.
So that was 2016.
Like the end of 2016, right?
So yeah, so the first book was in 2014. The second book was in 2016. And actually, there's a lot in this book, especially in the beginning, where it talks about us buying this piece of land and buying my own course and,
salivating over it.
Yeah. So that was released, and I spent a lot of time outside. I would come home from work, and I got totally engrossed with building this course. And I kind of had that concept of, if I build it, they will come. And, people were going to come out and play a lot of rounds, despite the fact that it was a long drive. And there were a couple times where we got some people out, some parties, but over time, it was just basically a private course. Yeah. Now, there was a reason that I was also trying to look for a private course and trying to put in my own. Even at the time in 2016 and 2015, I was being recognized a lot.
Which is crazy because you didn't do anything video. You never really had your picture out there.
The first, and it was cool, but being an ultra kind of, like you said, introverted person, and also working in the fire department and kind of having that, feeling of watching your six all the time and keeping your head on a swivel is just it was kind of strange to me. But the first time was really funny. It was Zach and I, when we just started the podcast, we were probably 5 episodes deep, and we were out at Bayville, and we were laughing and joking and carrying on a hole like number 16. And this guy comes running across the course. And it was probably like a Thursday afternoon or something. Comes running across the course and going, "Are you Pat and Zach? Are you Pat and Zach?" And we were like,
what do we do?
Yeah. They're like, "You guys are the ZEN Disc Golf Podcast." Yeah. And we looked at each other like, "Hey, this is pretty cool." And so I think the guy finished the last couple of holes with us, and we talked to him, and then we went to his car and we signed his discs. And other than the book signings, that was the first time I ever met somebody and signed discs for them, like out on the course. But that was happening more and more frequently, and I just got to the point where I just wanted to play and not
think,
have the pressure of that. And a lot of that's me, because trust me, I still find almost every time I go out to the course, I shouldn't say every time, but very, very often I go out to the course and I meet people who know me or know the book or recognize me or recognize my voice. It's often. I've even recently gone down as far as
North Carolina,
middle of North Carolina one day and ran into a group of people who knew about me, and I was just playing it wasn't random. I knew which course I was going to go play, but so it's not just a local thing. It's apparently pretty widespread. So at the time I was like, I want to just have my place where I can go play and zen out.
I think it's so funny too, because you're the guy who who wanted to be like really famous from your music. To think that like you're famous from disc golf, it wasn't your intention at all. I just think you don't know what to do with it. You're just like, well, I'm just gonna play. Hi.
Yeah, and I kind of had I don't want to say I had an issue with that, but it was kind of a thing that was in the forefront of my brain where I was just kind of like, this is great. I love all this, but I was supposed to get famous for my bands. This isn't how this was supposed to happen.
You had a hard time reconciling it.
Yeah.
And I think too, at that time in particular, when you would go and play, it's like we had a lot of other things going on, or you had work. And so that was like your one space of like, this is my time, this is my relaxation time. So it's not like that got in the way or anything, but you get your mind set at something, and that's how it's going to work out. And that's how you wanted it to be that day. It's just you and the disc and throwing it.
And I'm not trying to sound unappreciative, because my wife will attest that every time I go out to the disc golf course and somebody recognizes me or I sign a disc, I come running home and saying, I found somebody else. Somebody else knew me.
It's so cool. You say it's
cool.
So cool, but it's like an inner battle that you have with it.
Yeah. And I think most people who experience a success pretty rapidly probably experience something like that. But I wanted to have my own course. I'd always wanted a piece of land. I wanted my own course, and we started doing that. And so I was spending a inordinate amount of time out
chopping trees with machetes,
cutting fairways, and it sort of became an unhealthy refuge for me. And I will acknowledge that, because I've always said that these books, for better or for worse, were what I was learning about myself when I was playing on the course. Mm-hmm. So Patrick McCormick is not a perfect person. He's not a perfect player. I've never shot a negative 18 or even close. But that was one of the things I began. I do have an obsessive personality. I think we already covered that. Mm-hmm. And so I was obsessed with getting this course cut and chopped in. And it was almost an escape for me, having to deal with new family, the baby and all of that. And so unfortunately I used that as an escape, and you guys paid the price for that. And
plus we moved to a very isolating place, where there wasn't that many people and we didn't know anybody, and we were like an hour from their closest target kind of a place. And, it was very different for me, because you're an introvert and I'm a bit of an extrovert. And that's probably the challenge in it is, I was already kind of isolated there. And then you did kind of use an escape, not so much to escape us, but I think just because you loved it so much and you were so excited about it.
I was, and I wanted the course done yesterday. Yeah. And I was the only one out there. I did have a couple days where I had a couple workers come out and help me, cut fairways. But it was, I totally underestimated how difficult it was going to be.
And we didn't even mention we bought the second plot of land.
Oh, yes, we did. We originally bought 7 acres. We were going to put 9 holes on it. And then the other 7 acres next door came up for sale.
Like within the month of us buying it, and we're like, well, we might as well get that one, because the way it wrapped around our property, we didn't want someone else like chopping down all of our trees because it was wrapped around the whole.
So that was going to be the back 9.
Yeah.
Or the front 9, you know. So we were going to have 18 holes. But yeah, so it was just me out there doing most of the work, and I totally underestimated how difficult it was going to be. Especially without significant machinery, you know,
Right.
It's just Patrick and a machete and a chainsaw.
Trying to pull out stumps with the truck.
Yeah, pulling out stumps, like trying to engineer ways to pull out stumps. Finally, I just gave up on stumps.
Ran them over.
And or just, you know, shaved them off right at the ground level. But we had only lived there for about 4 months, and well, we lived there for about 2 months. For Christmas, I bought my steel chainsaw.
Right.
And that's when the work really got started. And
That was the best time out there because there's no mosquitoes.
oh yeah, yeah, no mosquitoes, no water. Everything was legit out there, and everything. It was a dream for me. I didn't know until later that it wasn't as much of a dream for you. I guess my excitement just blinded me. But you know, I take responsibility for that, and I have. But yeah, I had my steel chainsaw, and I'd throw it in the truck, and I'd go drive off on the property on the land, and I'd go cut all day. And then the next day I would go off to work for 24, and then I would come back and I would poke my head in, grab some breakfast, go to the bathroom, and then drive the truck back into the woods and just keep going. Well, one day I didn't come home because I was in the hospital. And I was coming home from work, and I lost control of the truck and spun out on the interstate, and I got T-boned by a dump truck. And that event significantly changed my life and is one of the big reasons why I did disappear for a long period of time. So I'll tell the story about that. And actually, a couple years later, when I combined these two books, I wrote about it in the back of the Complete Zen Disc Golf. So if you have that and you've read it, you may know a little bit of this story, but I'm going to go ahead and tell it. I was coming home from work. I was on 64, driving north, and it had just started raining, and the cars in front of me came to a complete stop on the interstate unexpectedly. I was a decent distance away from them, but
Patrick drives like a grandpa. Let's just be real. You usually have like 7-8 spaces in between you and the car in front of you.
But I noticed that their brake lights were coming on, but I knew they were slowing down, and so I started slowing down, but I didn't realize they came to an abrupt stop. So once I realized that they were stopped, I began to put the brakes on my truck, and then I felt the wheels spin out from behind me, and I started spinning. And the only thing I remember was gently kind of rolling into the Jersey wall. And then this lady comes running up, and she says, "Are you okay?" And before she got there, I tried to reach for my phone. I couldn't figure out how to work it.
Right.
And she comes up, she says, so I just relaxed, and I just said, somebody's going to have to take care of me, because
You couldn't.
I didn't know. I didn't know what was going on, where I was. I'd never felt so helpless in my whole life.
Well, especially since you're used to being on the other side of that, being a firefighter, being a medic, and working emergencies. You've never been in that emergency situation yourself.
I knew eventually somebody was going to come take care of me. I just hoped that traffic would stop and not hit me. And when I saw the lady come up, running up, I was like, okay, it's going to be all right. So she comes running up and she says, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm okay." And she said, "My name is," and I wish I remember her name because I would love to reach out and thank her. But she said who she was, and she said she was a nurse, and she said she was going to take care of me until the medics got there. And I said, "Okay." She said, "What's your name?" And I was able to tell my name. So I was alert and oriented at least ×1, which is what we use as jargon we use in the EMS field. It means person, place, or thing, an event. Person, place, or event. And I didn't know what happened, so I was not alert to the event. I had an idea where I was, but not so much. I couldn't like articulate it. I would have called myself, basically, I knew who I was.
Yep. That was about it.
That was about it. And so she says, do you have any bloodborne illnesses? And cause she didn't have gloves.
Well, at that point too, you didn't even know that the window was broken.
No. And so she said, can I use this shirt on the back of your chair because your head is bleeding? And I remember thinking, my head's not bleeding. I just, I lost control and gently rolled into the jersey wall. So she said, no, your head's bleeding. And then I started feeling the blood start running down the side of my face and my head. And I remember the shirt that she was trying to grab was my work dress shirt and had my badge on it. And I was like, no, anything but, and then I thought, you know what? I can get another one. So it's not a big deal. So she used that. She put it on my head. And that's when I realized that,
hey, are you talking to me through this window? Where did the window go?
Yeah, because remember it was raining. I didn't have my window down in the rain. So I still didn't have it figured out by then. I remember the first firefighter arrived, and it was from my city, so I knew who they were. I saw their face and I said, hey, I know that guy, but I couldn't remember his name. I remember telling the lady, hey, I know that guy. I also remember asking her if she would pray with me. And because it was I was helpless.
Yeah.
And the medics came and they picked me up, and I knew all of them, but I didn't know any of their names. I couldn't remember their names. They took me to the hospital, and I remember en route, I said, they were checking me all over, and they said, you have a significant head injury. I said, okay. And I knew that they were going to do a secondary assessment to try to find any other injuries. And I remember telling them, I do have I think I have a cut on my shoulder, and my middle finger on my right hand hurts. And I remember them joking with me. They said, with all due respect, sir, because I was an officer, we don't give a damn about your middle finger. We're only concerned about your head right now. I said, okay. So they took me in, and I remember they were giving turnover to the nurse as to, how they found me and all that kind of stuff. And one of them said, and that's when the dump truck hit him. And I remember coming off the bed a little bit and saying, you're thinking, I didn't get hit by a dump truck.
What are you talking about? That's not me.
You're thinking of a different accident. And they said, no, man, you got hit by a dump truck. And I was so confused at that time. I was like, I don't understand. So let me put together the pieces for all the viewers and listeners. When I spun out, I got T-boned by a dump truck, and I put my head through the window of the truck. And
it was the impact of the truck impressed into you. That's how you were able to do that.
There was intrusion by the dump truck. The dump truck hit me, pushed me, and then the dump truck went off the road into the ditch. And
you ended up in the jersey wall because the dump truck pushed you into the jersey wall.
Right. And they had to cut me out of the truck. And so I had many, many, many small glass shards in my head. And luckily, I knew the guy who was there. He was the ER tech that was working on my head. And for about, it just seemed like forever, for hours, he was just pulling glass shards out of my head. And that's probably that was probably the second most painful ordeal I've ever gone through. At some point, somebody had reached out to my uncle, who was a battalion chief in the department at that time, to get in touch with you.
Oh, I think it was, I want to say maybe that lady had your phone and called John, because John was the first one that called me, but immediately followed by Jeff.
John would be my uncle, and then Jeff, his brother.
Right, your other uncle.
So Jeff is the chief, and John was his brother.
Mm-hmm.
And so John called you. What did John say?
That you'd been in an accident, that was pretty bad. Wasn't sure what all happened, but I needed to drive, an hour away to the hospital to come see you. That you had a head injury was all that John kind of knew. He didn't know much at that time. But when Jeff called, I was already, I threw on some clothes, grabbed little man, and jumped in the car. But like, because I knew that it was serious, and Jeff was like, so yeah, there's a piece of his head missing, and might be some punctured ribs, and he called out, I think, an ablation or something for your head. It just, I took his what he said a lot more seriously, just because I figured he had more intel into what was going on. But it was pretty scary, and my big fear in all of it is that I would drive there. That whole drive was horrid. That whole way, thinking, what's going on? What do you look like? What do you feel like? Will you remember me? Like I remember that whole way, thinking it'll be okay no matter what happens or what kind of recovery we have, if he at least knows who I am. Because when you hear your husband has had a major accident, he was T-boned by a dump truck, you just don't know what you're going to be walking into when you walk into the hospital. So my biggest thought in all of it was, will you know me? And I knew that it would be okay if you did. So I was amazed when I got there and you recognized me, and also you still looked like you. You were pretty bloody, but you still looked like you, because I didn't know what I was going to walk into. A dump truck is rather large, and you're just a man, so it's, you faced a dump truck, and I would say you won, but it took a little piece of you.
So what Jeff had said, I guess he had gotten some poor information, but at the end of the day, the biggest injuries that I sustained were as a head injury with the glass in my head, and
you ended up getting staples in your head, didn't you?
Stitches.
Yeah.
There was a flap that came off my head, and my finger was broken between my middle finger, between my knuckle and the tip of my finger, was broken in 8 places. Something
a spiral
like that.
fracture, I think they called it.
Yeah, there's bad break, and all of that we ended up finding out that I also had a traumatic brain injury. And the way we sort of found that out was, it wasn't really me who figured it out. It was more of you seeing the symptoms, because I was not all together.
No.
For a long period of time.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Like, you wouldn't remember. Your memory wasn't what it used to be. You missing pieces of time, or you were thinking that something was a certain way when that's not the way it happened. It was definitely, your brain wasn't connecting the dots, especially right after. I mean, the couple of weeks after that, I wasn't sure what it would end up be. I'm amazed, and we're so blessed that you are who you are now and able to write a book and do a podcast and all of that. But for the couple of weeks after that, it was, I was curious to see how bad it was, basically.
Yeah, and this was only maybe 6 or 7 months after the last episode of the original podcast. It wasn't that
March
long.
2017. Yeah.
So, you would tell me that I was asking questions over and over again, and I had no recollection.
Or that this is typical husband thing, but I would tell you something, and you'd be like, "You didn't tell me that." And I'd be like, "Yeah, I told you that."
I ended up discovering that I was having a hard time with speech and putting words together and remembering words. And after three months, I stayed out of work. Going back to work, I was terrified because I couldn't even really write. I wasn't the same person. And in my job, there's a lot of times where we have to take tests and things like that. And I'd always been valedictorian, always been,
you'd always been very proud of your recollection and be able to pull in facts. You used to even memorize things just because you enjoyed it and you were really good at it. So I think it was very hard for you not to have that, because that's part of, part of your identity and how you thought of yourself as something that you were very good with. So I think you had a very hard time. I mean, nobody wants to know that their brain's not functioning properly, but you in specific, because it was something you used to be very good at, I think you struggled with that. And it was hard to see you struggle with that.
And that went on for a long period of time, and still have effects today from it. But that was, a large part of the reason why you guys didn't really hear from me for a while, because I wasn't there.
Yeah.
I wasn't all there. And then we tack on the hand injury, which was so significant that I ended up having to get a plate and nine screws between my two joints here. And my finger's never been shaped right since. I call it my wonky finger, but
he always jokes that it should be like chopped off or something. That you
I wish they would have cut it off, because my grip on the disc has never been the same, and I struggle with it, especially my forehand grip. I struggle with that, but also in my backhand grip, because it causes a lot of drag when the disc comes out of the hand. So I am still, in physical therapy, trying to relearn how to throw. But right after the accident, there's photos of me where you took me out. I mean, it must have been like the day after.
Yeah, week of at least.
Where I had told you, I don't care, I'm going to learn to throw left-handed.
Yeah, I was worried you'd go out there and get lost in the woods somewhere.
You wouldn't let me go by myself.
Not at all.
Because I wasn't mentally capable.
No, yeah.
So.
But you were determined. You're like, nope, I'm going to go out there, and this is what's going to make me better. I'm going to go out and throw some disc. I can't use my right hand. It's in a cast and a sling. I'm going to go out there with my head bandage, my sling hung, and I'm going to throw left-handed, dag nabbit.
And then even, after the surgery, and the surgery hurt way worse than the hand, because we realized that I didn't have, that the certain medication they gave me after the nerve block didn't work. So it was like I felt the surgery live on my finger when we got home. That was the most intense pain I've ever had in my life.
Yeah, I've never seen someone in so much pain.
And, but yeah, so even when we got the cast off and everything, I said, I'm going out there, I'm gonna start putting. I got to do something. And I remember coming in just with tears on my eyes, because it hurt so bad. I couldn't even, putt 3 feet, because I couldn't even hold the disc in my hand. It hurt so bad.
Yeah.
And so it was during that time that's when I realized how much time I was spending in the woods and away from you guys. And sometimes it takes something like that to help a person reprioritize their life. And so a lot of that began to occur at that time. So there's still rehabilitation that's going on with me. My brain is almost back to normal. I think there's been a number of things that...
Yeah, your recollection and processing and things like that. I don't know how much you want to get into it, but I do feel like getting smacked with a dump truck kind of jumbled up your alphabet soup too. And
so what she's referring to here as alphabet soup is the act of having a traumatic brain injury sometimes will pull things to the surface if you've got other mental things going on, and turned out I did. And so she's talking about the fact that we ended up finding out that I was diagnosed later with PTSD. And some of that was from the accident, and most of that was from the fire department, and just...
Well, you guys just see things that humans just are not built to see and not built to experience, and that it carries with you.
So here's this thing that so many people had written me and said, the first book helped me with PTSD, and I use disc golf as a way to deal with PTSD. And then I find out that I get, diagnosed with it. And the other parts of the alphabet soup were also OCD and ADD, but they kind of, they say they fold up into the diagnosis. So we laugh and we call that my alphabet soup. So,
well, at least the OCD and the ADD help you to accomplish things like podcasts and books and things like that.
Yeah. So when I came to you and I said, I'm going to write another book, I never thought I would, but this year when I came to you and I said, I'm going to do this, that was a big kind of undertaking for me to say, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write this, and I'm prepared now. I've gotten past
the mental break of
doing that,
what a dump truck did to you.
And so that was a pretty big deal. also during that time, we started having some problems with the house.
Mm-hmm.
The house.
This is when our country song comes in.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let's start with the land. I had put in before the accident about 9 holes, and I couldn't throw for at least 6 months to a year like a normal person. And so I wasn't going out and doing it because it was too painful. I did learn to throw left-handed,
Mm-hmm.
but my job changed. I ended up going to a 40-hour, and now
mostly because the finger too, just because your finger still is like like that.
it scares children.
Yeah.
And but that happened, and but there was a really rainy season,
Mm-hmm.
and we ended up getting enough rain that at least 4 out of the 9 holes
They were just underwater.
they were underwater.
All that work that you did.
All the work, yeah, and that land was absolutely dry when I got started, and the water never left.
Mm-hmm.
So we were in that house for 4 years, and it ended up just getting more and more swampland. The water came and it never left, and the house started to the foundation started to sink.
Yep, it did. And, the house had been there since 68. So our, thought when we bought it was it's been here this long. It's survived through storms. There's never been water inside. We have flood insurance. Sure, we feel safe. But something about that couple of years that we were there, just the moisture and the ground and the water table. I mean, we were basically below sea level, but it was just inundated. And then the house eventually did start to sink. And so we had that we were dealing with me trying to scrape by and come up with my own businesses from home. And really, honestly, like we've talked about recently, Zen and the Art of Disc Golf is what kept us afloat a lot of time during those years so we could get through month to month.
It definitely did. The fact that you all are out there buying the books kept our family going through some of these hard times, and they got harder.
Yeah.
Because around that time, Bryce was diagnosed with autism.
Right. Yeah. We always knew that. I mean, like I said, he was never easy. Always cute, but never easy. And it was, he was born in 2015. We moved there 16. Your accident was 17. And he was...
It was late 17, I think, that he got diagnosed.
He was 3 years old when he was diagnosed. We knew right around 18 months to 2 years old. I think what year, my math is not working right in my head, but right around 18 months to 2 years old, we were like, something's a little different. He's not speaking. He's not responding when we call his name.
I thought he was deaf.
Yeah, we did. We both did. We got him checked out, and that checked out fine. The way they check kids is with puppets and sounds and lights and stuff. And he checked out fine. And
I wish I was there. I would have giggled.
You love puppets. He's really good with Kermie, by the way. Kermie puppet voices. But we just knew, we've always been his advocate, and we've always been very realistic that we are his parents. We need to get some answers though, because we just knew, especially with seeing him, even though we were very isolated there, we'd met a couple friends locally, and then just seeing kids around his age or even younger than him that were speaking and doing, and he's our only child, so some of it we knew, but we were just like, well, maybe boys talk late, and yeah, that's true, but when you get to 2 years old, 2.5 years old, if your child's not speaking a couple hundred words, that's atypical. So we had him in speech for a long time. I fought with a very well-known doctor's office for kids, and asked over and over again, is he on the spectrum, is he autistic? And they're like, no, boys just talk late. And we eventually get an appointment, and that takes a very long time and a long process, but within 5 minutes of talking to a developmental pediatrician, she was like, yeah, your son's on the autism spectrum, he's level 2. And both of us, and I'm a crier, I'm surprised I haven't cried already with all the stuff we're talking about, but I started crying, not because my son is autistic, but because we finally had an answer. We finally had a path and a goal and some direction to take, and finally somebody was listening to us because we'd worked through this. And yeah, all kids are difficult in relationships, but when you do have a kid on a spectrum, especially a nonverbal one, getting them to put on clothes and leave the house and all of that, yeah, all toddlers have a hard time going to the grocery store, but when you have a child who's nonverbal, who doesn't understand what you're doing, and he wants what he wants when he wants it, you're going to have the price to pay. And we learned very quickly on that, we need to go at his pace and his speed. And right around that time, when he was 3 is when we got diagnosed. And so all of this was kind of happening at the same time.
Right after my accident.
Right after your accident was when he was diagnosed. So needless to say, I was a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs too. And then with the stress of it all, that's a lot to take on.
Yeah.
Without support and without, many other people in our lives besides church family. And
well, we thought that the diagnosis was going to lead to a significant amount of help, and that it was going to be easy to get support like care aids and the different therapies
services,
that he needs, and not so much. We discovered that it doesn't. You have a diagnosis now. Now the fight begins.
Yeah, and we learned very quickly. And it's continually a fight. It's always a fight. Even moving to a new location here, it's a fight, and that's why we moved, is to get him services. And it's going to be, I think I've just come to terms with, it's just going to be a fight forever. Getting half the battle was the diagnosis, and the rest of the half is the rest of the, his life, that we're making sure he has everything he needs and being there for him and getting him the services he needs. And he's come so far, and we're so proud of him. Now, I would say minimally verbal, but he is starting to say, a couple words together. He's 5 years old, 5.5 now. And there's things that we, after a while, we're like, well, we're not sure if this is ever going to happen. Is he ever going to speak? Is he ever going to get out of diapers? Is he ever going to get out of his crib? Those kinds of questions that most parents don't have to think about. We had, stared in the face every day for a long time. And there's a lot of stress that comes with meltdowns and tantrums, part of it, but also making sure he gets what he needs and trying to have some sort of a, relationship on top of it, and then work on top of it, and finances and sinking house and all of it. It's a lot to take in.
Sure. And by the end, we discovered that the property that we had bought was just not going to work for us. And it was a lot to do with the stuff that we just talked about. There was, Bryce was not going to be able to get the care and some of the things that just was not available rurally that he needed.
Yeah.
Now, I will say the care that he did get there was awesome. We had good relationships with teachers at the school and all of that.
His special ed teacher was amazing. Some of the special ed assistants ended up being some of our care aides, because we couldn't find outside care aides, so we ended up hiring some of the ones from the school that came to work with us part-time. So they were absolutely amazing. I still talk with almost all of those people now. We don't even live there anymore, and they were definitely amazing. The services is a big part, and behavior therapy is what we really need for him, and we just could not get it because it was so rural out there.
And then you add on the fact that the disc golf course just was not viable anymore because it was underwater, and then you just add on other difficulties that we had since we lived there. And so we just made the decision to move once again, and that was a hard decision to make, but we ended up moving closer to society. And
which is great for me.
and for me, because honestly, we are kind of triangulated by, in my opinion, some of the best disc golf courses around. And so if the disc golf course, having if you have 9 holes that are your own and you have to take care of them and it takes you away from your family, isn't it better to have 3 18-hole courses that are even better, and you just go pay your $2 and you go? So
I think that's, sorry to interrupt, but I think that's what we learned there too, is that you spent most of your time trying to make the course workable, and then especially after Bryce's needs became more than what we had, the little bit of time you had, you would never been able to play disc golf.
No.
And then driving to a course was over an hour and 15 minutes, something like that.
And even though I built it, they did not come.
It's just too far and not close to anything. I mean, like we said, a Target was an hour and 15 minutes away. So we were out there.
So I personally don't regret any part of it. The only thing that I regret is during that process, not being able to maintain this Zen Disc Golf world that I created
built,
from the beginning. I'm super thankful for all of the fans who have stuck with me. Some of those fans, they ended up following me personally on Facebook, and I've maintained relationships with them. And, they've checked up on me. During the hard times, Zach Englehart was
amazing.
A shoulder that I could rely on and cry on, even though he was all the way up in New York. He did a lot for my mental health and our family.
Yep. There was times where I felt like I couldn't reach you, and
after
I knew
the accident.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. And I knew that Zach could, because he understood a bit about what you were going through and could talk to you in a different way than I could.
And during that time, he and I started a different podcast called the Animal Mind Podcast. I forget how many episodes. There's probably about 15 episodes, but he became a hunting guide. So he's kind of a wild man out in the woods. He's hard to get in touch with. He did give his blessing for this podcast, and he's excited. And Tim and Chris gave their blessing. And the one thing that the biggest regret I have is that those 2 years or 2.5 years, people were still contacting me.
Mm-hmm.
And
you beat yourself up a little bit about it.
I didn't respond. And it wasn't because it wasn't because I was trying to neglect anybody. It was because I wasn't there.
Yeah.
I couldn't.
Yeah, you just didn't have the space to do it.
And so to those people, I'm immensely sorry that I couldn't, if you wrote me an email or sent me a message over the past couple years, you now have your explanation as to what was going on. And that's my biggest regret, that I feel like I let some of you guys down, but I'm back. And I plan on staying back. Mm-hmm. And if there's any indication, it's this 270-page book that I put together this year. And I'm super excited about this book. This book is the physical side of disc golf. Because when you stack these books up, how does somebody write that much about? Okay, disc so golf. That's not fair, because this one is a combination. But
well, I think too, that's for a while you're like, I don't know if I have another disc golf book in me. Like, I've already written 2 books. What am I going to write a 3rd book about?
I said that before the 2nd book.
That's true. Yeah.
So, but this disc golf strategies and tactics, I feel like it closes the loop, because we talk about, and there are things in here about the mental side of the game. There's a chapter in here about the mental side of the game, but this is a lot about, disc science and physics and throwing and trying to come up with good strategy when you're on the course. And
it's a shame it doesn't have the original title.
If you want to know that, you can listen to Scott Stokely's podcast where I reveal that. But after this came out, it was sort of a thing where I told you, I said, hey, I think I'm going to release another book, and you were like, oh my gosh, here we go again.
I totally did.
Especially when I told you my timeline.
Yeah, I'm very supportive. Like, I'm very, very supportive, I feel like. And usually, like we've said, you're pretty obsessive when it comes to things. And I've come to just learn that if you say you're going to do something, I know you're going to do it, whether it's buying a product or making a product. And I've learned to just go for the ride, just because it makes it a lot easier for me. Not like you're a bully or anything, but you get an idea set in your head, and like
I'm obsessive.
You are obsessive. You get very excited about it, and why would you want to like stample on somebody's excitement? If that's a word, I don't know.
It's not. It's one of your.
I make up words all the time.
You mixed stamp and stifle.
No, but a positive word like stifle. Thank you. Anyway, why would you want to stifle somebody's creative joy? And I think that's what people might be like, oh, he's just coming back because he did a book. I don't feel like that at all. You're coming back because this book has helped you again. It's like your passion has always been disc golf, even when you weren't writing about it, even when you weren't podcasting about it, even when you weren't doing a course. It was still always stewing in your head. You still would go and throw a couple at the house and things like that.
I try not to throw them at the house.
Well, sometimes roofs and all get them and stuff.
Well, a big thing was coming off 40 hours too, and going back and working at the fire station with my boys, who are also my league, and then we play every day at work.
Oh yeah, and I think that has helped you a lot too, through all of these country song trials that we have had over the last couple of years is having that camaraderie that you have with your guys at work, and that's your PT time. That's when you guys get to get some conditioning in and playing disc golf, and it's allowed because it's therapy. It's therapy, and it's therapy, and I think it has helped you come through a lot of the things that we've done. One, because you love the sport, and two, because you love your guys at work, and it's a way that y'all can connect and relate to one another. I did kind of like do a big sigh when you started talking about writing another book, and another big sigh when you talked about doing a podcast. Also, like you said, the timeline of this book. I would say people out there, how long would you think it would take to write a book? Just think about it in your head. Just visualize a book. How long does it take to write a book?
Let's just say Zen and the Art of Disc Golf was 110 pages. It took me 3 years.
For the first one.
So
it took you 3 years for the first one?
Yeah, so I would say this is about 3 times the length of that one. So this should take me 9 years.
No, not Patrick McCormick. Not at all. Somehow in your head thought, okay, it's November. I really want to get this book out. And I have these great ideas to do the book. And we'll chat about that in a second, because I think it's really cool how you came up with the idea. But when your husband comes to you and says, hey, I'm going to write another book about disc golf. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to have it out before Christmas. And being that it was already November, middle of November, I think it was around November 16th that you started, you said, I'm going to have this done and for sale by December 15th. And in my head, I was thinking, yep, that's official. You are crazy to do a book, not to mention that I didn't know at the time that it was going to be almost triple.
I didn't either.
Triple the length. And you just kept writing.
I actually had to cut it. I actually had to cut it. It was going to be longer. And subsequent editions might even be longer.
Yeah. It's crazy.
But it's 270 pages.
Could you imagine writing a book this big?
Yes.
And formatting it and photographs and...
Well, let's give credit to Chris Norica.
Yeah, too. I love them. I mean, how cool is that? Seriously.
So she's showing one of Chris's photos. So the story behind that, and I'm going to have Chris on the podcast, but he had been a fan of the original books, and I guess I realized that. Maybe I didn't, but I had been a fan of his work on Instagram, and I'd been reposting some of his images. And his images are pretty specific. They show the disc as it's in flight.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, cool. It's not stop motion. I don't know exactly what to call it. Maybe he'll tell us.
Yeah.
But it shows the disc as it's in flight, which is exactly what the book needed, because it's hard to show in a still image exactly what a disc is doing when it's hitting like hyzer angles or anhyzer angles.
Well, you even joked on the other books, like, you're not going to learn disc golf from a book. And And you could do it in this one with his images and with how you describe things. And, you do put out there, hey, this isn't going to be the only thing you do to get better. It's going to be a combination.
It's an adjunct.
Right. Exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, on page 1, I said, I quoted myself, believe me, there's no way one book could teach you how to play disc golf. Patrick McCormick, Zen and the Art of Disc Golf, page 7. Hold my bag. I'm about to try something crazy. Patrick McCormick, Disc Golf Strategies and Tactics, page 1. So I quoted it. It's a circular quote. It's quoting itself. Over
so clever.
So I reached out to Chris, and I asked him if I could raid his Instagram and grab some of the photos that he already had up there. And he wrote me back, and he was so excited, and he was like, what else do you need? And I was like, well, I really would need a couple photos like this. And he was like, I'll have them back to you in 48 hours. I was like, holy cow.
All right.
So
cool, I'm down.
So yeah, he went above and beyond to get these great photos for the book, and he's been very supportive. And we're going to have him on the podcast to talk about his process of photographing. I think he comes on about mid-February. Like I said, the guests on this podcast have just multiplied since I announced it. I think I have 8 scheduled guests right now. That doesn't include this other podcast that I'm dropping on the same day as this one with Scott Stokely.
Yep.
So, and the reason I did that was to give you a couple. And if you weren't so interested in the history, you could get right to the guests.
Yep. Because especially this episode is going to be, different than your other ones.
Oh, totally different. This is about me. This is about the book. This is about our family.
Right.
And this is getting out the information as to what happened, where did I go, and then boom, after this, it's going to be about every guest.
Yeah.
It's going to be getting them to talk about themselves and diving in deep with them.
Right. It's going to be all about them.
So I had a lot of fun recording this. I have no idea how long it is. And if you stayed in this the entire time, God bless you. And thank you for sitting in our living room. Welcome to our house, by the way. I should have said that earlier.
Yeah, hi, how's it going?
But thank you so much. And the biggest thing that you can do to help, even more than buying the books.
Buy my book.
You know, that helps a lot. But the best thing that you can do to help is to click subscribe on YouTube. We're in a YouTube world now.
Yep.
I want you to subscribe on the audio cast, on wherever you're digesting your audio podcast, Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, where can they find you?
Stitcher, Spotify, all of those. It should be landing on those. If they're not there, if you're not digesting it right now from that area, it'll be there shortly, because sometimes it takes a little time to process. Mm-hmm. But YouTube is huge. And clicking subscribe and watching these videos, that helps spread it and get the algorithm to work so that I move up and more people can see it. So hit subscribe. Thank you for watching, and share this with your friends, and stay tuned. There's a lot of great stuff we have in store for you.
Yep.
I do.
Yeah, I won't be here anymore. Sorry. Nice to meet y'all.
She might be back. We never
Probably
know.
hanging out. Bryce might run past, you know.
Never say never.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Chris.
Cool. Thanks, Hubs.
All right. Let's go watch some TV or something.
Something, yeah.
Thank you so much. Have a nice night. Can you say, hi, Zen Disc Golf Nation? A golf ball? How about a disc golf? Bryce, can you say, hi, everybody?
Hi, everybody.